Capital punishment or execution means taking away the life of someone for a crime. It's administered by the state and is therefore not called murder, and it's also called the death penalty. Whilst it was abolished or got rid of in the UK in 1973, many countries continue to use this form of punishment, such as China and parts of the USA. It is estimated that there is one execution per day somewhere in the world, with the greatest number being in China, where some estimates say that about 7,000 people are sentenced to death each year. Methods include hanging, lethal injection, the electric chair, and death by firing squad. People feel that capital punishment deters or puts people off from committing crimes and protects society and gives family justice. It is a form of punishment designed for retribution. People disagree about the use of capital punishment, however. On the one hand, the death penalty acts as a warning or deterrent, and it makes the value of human life very clear, because by executing people who choose to ignore it, it shows that there will be a consequence. It can also make the criminal confess to crimes or be used to make plea bargains, where criminals give up important information to avoid punishment. The death penalty means that society can rid itself of the most dangerous people, some who would argue that they can never be reformed, such as serial killers, and provides protection for civilians. Execution provides justice for families and retribution for the crime committed. It helps society to realise that you will have to pay if you commit a crime. On the other hand, in countries such as America and China where the death penalty is legal, there are still high murder rates. Furthermore, if murder is wrong, because everyone has the right to life, which is a human right, we should not let the government take life either. We should be more forgiving towards criminals and show mercy. Maybe even try and reform them. Many people have been executed who are later found to be innocent, particularly after DNA was found. Just as with torture, criminals may admit to things they haven't done to escape the death penalty, and it only becomes apparent later that they were actually innocent. Some people also feel that execution is an easy punishment, because many criminals would prefer to die rather than spend their lives in prison. With regards to Christianity, many feel that they should follow the laws of the land and that capital punishment may be justified for certain crimes. Other Christians argue that this is not in keeping with Jesus' teachings in the New Testament. They argue that Jesus' message of love outweighs any arguments for revenge in the Old Testament. The Old Testament does, however, teach that capital punishment should be used for serious crimes. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. You could also use the quotation, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, to suggest that retribution is acceptable. St. Paul teaches that Christians should accept and obey the laws and punishments of the government, which, if you're in an area that allows the death penalty, applies to that as well. Jesus never taught that the death penalty was wrong, and the Roman Catholic Church still permit the death penalty for various crimes, in theory. On the other hand, it goes against the sanctity of life, the idea that all life is sacred and a gift from God. This would suggest that only God has the right to take life away. Jesus also came to save and reform people, which means to make them better. An executed criminal cannot be forgiven or reformed. It's also worth mentioning that Jesus was a victim of capital punishment himself. Jesus taught that revenge is wrong. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye. But I tell you, if someone strikes you or hits you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to him also. It doesn't mean you should go around offering your cheek to people who slap you. It does mean that you could forgive them instead of slapping them back. Most Christian churches have spoken out against the death penalty as well, and argue that we should love and forgive criminals instead. This quote here comes from the parable of the goats and the sheep, which, if you remember, suggests that anything you do kindly for someone else, it's as though you were doing for Jesus as well. The Quran teaches that capital punishment may be applied for some crimes, but people disagree as to whether it should apply today. It says, for instance, take not life, which God has made sacred. This suggests that the sanctity of life is a very important principle, and we shouldn't not follow it. The shedding of the blood of a Muslim is not lawful except for 3 reasons, however, suggests that it might be acceptable in the following cases. A life for a life, which suggests retribution, a married person who commits adultery, which is still practiced in some countries, and one who turns aside from his religion, which is not so frequently practiced. The death penalty may only be applied in Islam after a fair trial and as a last resort. The victim's family must also agree to the punishment according to Sharia or Islamic law. 4 witnesses must also testify to having seen the crime, and it is said that during Muhammad's time nobody was executed apart from for adultery. That said, many Islamic countries still use capital punishment for a range of things, including murder, rape, homosexual acts, and for anyone working against Islam. Muslims around the world often strongly disagree with this interpretation of the Quran. So then, the Quran clearly says that the death penalty may be given for certain circumstances, and Muhammad made statements to that effect as well. He did sentence people to death for murder. Islamic philosophy teaches that punishment should be harsh in order to deter or put people off from crime, and clearly in the case of people like Saddam Hussein, lots of Muslims argued that it was the only acceptable punishment for all the things that he had done. On the other hand, the scholars of Sharia law do not agree on when the death penalty should be applied, and some people would argue that it's outdated, and now that we understand different things, we shouldn't be so harsh, particularly in the case of homosexual acts or other religions. The Quran also says that it should be an option only when others have been considered. The conditions for death penalty as laid out in the Quran are rarely met, so the punishment should not be given. Many Muslims argue that Sharia law is not being applied in countries that allow the death penalty. For instance, it mainly targets the women and the poor. Here in Egypt, hundreds of people have been arrested and sentenced to death for protesting, which most Muslims would argue, in this country, is not acceptable at all. Therefore, you could argue that the death penalty is being used unfairly to promote or support governments who treat its populations unfairly.